Hey Retro Gamers, today on Smashing Bricks we embark on a journey of existential proportions in Final Fantasy IX for the Sony PlayStation. Hey, welcome back to Smashing Bricks, a retro gaming podcast. This is episode 26. My name is Inzauto, and today, you know him, you love him. I'm joined by freelance game journalist extraordinaire, Jason Fanelli. Hey, Jason.
Now I have to live up to those lofty expectations. Oh, how are you, friend? Things are. It's been a minute since we last talked. I'm hoping that recording this podcast bodes well for the abundant rumors that this game's getting remade soon, because it worked last time.
Exactly. Yeah, even I caught wind of this Final Fantasy IX remake rumor, and I don't really pay attention to news anymore.
Yeah, it's been I'd say like a year and a half, like 2 years we've been hearing this through the grapevine. Granted, it's not as if Square Enix hasn't been busy. They Final Fantasy 16, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth just last week, which is staring at me from my shelf. I haven't had a chance to dive into that one yet.
Yeah, that one's exciting.
But as far as the 9 remake is concerned, I would really like to see that because I think the game deserves it.
Yeah, we're having some really good timing on these episodes. I'm digging it. And interestingly enough, the last time you were here with me was for another Square RPG. So, man, this is shaping up to be a trend.
Yes, technically it was a Square RPG. It had a little bit of a Nintendo bend to it. This is more of their
Squintendo RPG.
A Squintendo, Nintendinix. Oh, they weren't Square Enix yet.
Exactly.
Nintendo Soft, that doesn't work. But yeah, so this one's a little more in the traditional Square Soft wheelhouse. Is Final Fantasy IX, and it is one that I had not revisited since my original playthrough when the game came out.
Goodness.
So I was this was a very cool return trip for me. And there's a lot I forgot in this, but again, obviously we'll get to all that. And man, is it good.
That's exactly what the kind of thing that I was creating this podcast for, was those games where you had a memory of it and you were like, am I remembering this right? Is there more to this? Is there less to this? Let's see it again and see how it feels now. So that's going to be cool for you. It'll be my first time playing, but we'll get to that. What I want to do is I want us to give a couple of our top Final Fantasy games of all time, not including 9, and then maybe at the end we'll stick 9 in there where it belongs. So what are like your top few Final Fantasy games?
I'm going to make people angry right from the jump.
Oh, I love it.
I know that. But my all-time favorite Final Fantasy is 8. And that's 8. Because it was the first one I ever played.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I received it with the Sony PlayStation for Christmas that year. I want to say 98, 99, something like that. It was the first one. I had dabbled in turn-based RPGs previously, Super Mario RPG being the first one, and then a little bit of Chrono Trigger at a friend's house, but I didn't own it, right? Like I just played it with him. But Final Fantasy VIII was not only my window to Final Fantasy, it was my window to what turn-based RPGs could do in general. And if I were to ever do the games that shaped me, like the games that made me the gamer that I am, FF8 is up there. And so I hold it in such high regard. It'll always be number one with a bullet, unless they ever remake it. Speaking of, number 2 is Final Fantasy VII Remake specifically. That's not to say I don't like 7, but the remake was absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, and then third on my all-time list, it would be 5. 5 is my favorite of the retros, partially because I haven't played 6.
Nice.
but I really liked how 5. I thought 5 was going to end like 4 different times. Then it threw another boss at me. Normally that makes me angry, but when I played it, I was not angry about it. It was very, very cool. And I will die on the hill that Final Fantasy V has the greatest version of the Chocobo theme, that being Mambo de Chocobo, where in the middle of the intro it just goes, huh, and then starts the song.
Yeah.
I love that song so much. So yeah, my top 3 for now at the beginning of the podcast are 8, 7 remake, and 5.
All right. So for me, I'm not a huge Final Fantasy player, historically. So really, really my top ones are like the ones that I played. So Final Fantasy X is one of my all-time favorite RPGs in general, even though it was not my, introduction to RPGs, although it was the first Final Fantasy that I really fully completed. So 10 will always be up there for me, like as an all-time game in general. I love 4, so I would probably put 4 next. 6 may usurp the title of number 2 if I finish it, because I was really getting into that. And that doesn't really leave much else. It's like 10-2 versus 12 are my next 2 choices. And I kind of like 10-2. That game did the job system super well.
Agreed.
And I know
Agreed
people
100%.
hate on that game because of like the themes, but I don't know. I was into it.
Listen, there's nothing wrong with a franchise doing something different, yeah? Exactly. X2 did something different, and some people hate that it was all girl power and stuff, but I can only imagine how many loves for RPGs that game spawned, so I'm all about it.
Speaking of girl power, there's a lot of girl power in this game.
Yes, there is.
Right? We got whole kingdoms led entirely by women with armies of entirely women. So it's not the first time Final Fantasy did that. Anyway, so that's where we're at the beginning. We'll see where we wind up at the end after we've played Final Fantasy IX. But what is Final Fantasy IX, Jason?
Final Fantasy IX is the 9th installment, sort of the Final Fantasy series. There was also Legend 1, 2, and 3, Final Fantasy Adventure, Mystic Quest, which were on the handheld games. There was also Final Fantasy Tactics, the turn-based strategy game. Follows this game, Final Fantasy IX, follows the story of Zidane Tribal, Princess Garnet, and Alexandria. I always want to say they're from Burmecia. They're not. They're from Alexandria. They invade Burmecia, and Clara is there too. I always get that mixed up, even now, having just replayed it. Anyway.
Yeah. This kingdom went to that kingdom, went to that kingdom.
Yes, there's a lot of kingdoms going on. So the Zidane is part of a traveling group called Tantalus, who go to the Kingdom of Alexandria disguised as a theater troupe, which I am near and dear to my heart, being a theater guy. And they try to kidnap the princess, only to find out that she wants to be kidnapped because she's trying to meet with Cid. And things go from there, and we'll get into all that. But there's a lovable cast of characters, including one of the best Final Fantasy characters ever of all time.
Vivi.
That's correct, in my humble opinion. He is great. And some of the coolest set pieces. I love again, we're talking about music. We'll talk about the music once again. Some of the songs in this are prime Final Fantasy soundtrack. Kuja, in particular, every time he's on the screen, that song slaps. But that is where we are right now. It did not. It was not as critically acclaimed as 7, but like 1A. 8 kind of fell off because it did some weird stuff with the draw system and Guardian Forces that I like and nobody else seems to like. But Final Fantasy IX was like 1A in terms of critically acclaimed PS1 era Final Fantasy games. 9.75 out of 10 from Game Informer. 5 stars from GamePro. Rest in peace, GamePro. Prayers up. 9.2 out of 10 from IGN. 5 stars from Next Generation. The iOS port got 5 stars from Touch Arcade, so it's still doing well. Won Console RPG of the Year at the Interactive Achievement Awards, the 4th annual at that time. Began its development in 1998 before Final Fantasy VIII was finished. This was the first game that, while written by Sakaguchi, was not primarily directed by him or Kitase. Hiroyuki Ito, who had co-directed with Kitase on 6, I believe was the main guy behind this one. Yes.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
It
Five
is.
games by Sakaguchi, then a bunch by Kitase, but like this one kind of left out. I think probably because he was working on 8, and then they had to start the new game, and then Kitase jumped to 10.
Yeah.
So they had Ito just kind of direct this one,
You just
which
kind
is
of filled in,
interesting.
which that is an
Yeah.
interesting approach to that. Launched in July 2000 in Japan, November 2000 in the US, and February of the following year in EU, back when worldwide releases were not a thing.
Yeah.
As the series last came on the PlayStation, Sakaguchi-san envisioned a reflection on the older games of the series. Leading up to its release, he called Final Fantasy IX his favorite Final Fantasy game, which is a lofty thing to say considering how many he had worked on, as it's the closest to his ideal view of what Final Fantasy should be.
Yeah, they kind of went in a different direction with 7 and 8, right? And then
Yeah.
they took 9 to like jump back into maybe a little bit more of the series roots. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, and you can see that in like the 4-party versus 3-party and some of the other, like the way the weapons work. There's definitely some more traditional Final Fantasy fare as you
Yeah.
dig into the systems of this game.
You know, they even used some classic fantasy stuff as inspiration. The Dark Crystal was noted as inspiration for this world and the character design. Yeah, lots of different animal people. Like even
Yeah.
Zidane has a tail. You know, he's like almost like a monkey boy in a way. Also, interestingly, because of that departure from 7 and 8, they were thinking about not calling it Final Fantasy 9 because they figured like new fans of the PS1 era would be so used to what Final Fantasy was at that time that this might turn them off because it went back to the fantasy thing. And they ended up adjusting this game so much in development. Even though development was short, they even changed the ending of the game 7 times in development, which is
Well, they got it
a
right.
lot. Yeah.
they
Yeah,
certainly
the end
got
of
it
this
right.
game, spoiler, is pretty cool, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Some of the games that were out at this time were just a cavalcade of RPG and close to RPG goodness, you know. In 1999, we had EverQuest. Its first expansion came out in 2000. In 99 and 2000, depending on where we were in the world, we had Chrono Cross, also from Square. Pokemon Yellow, Gold, Silver, Crystal were all like 99, 2000, 2001. Vagrant Story was earlier in 2000, which was also by Square, I believe. Grandia 2 in 2000. Diablo 2 in 2000. Baldur's Gate 2 in 2000. Paper Mario in 2000. Majora's Mask, which is not an RPG, but is, I think we mentioned on the Ocarina of Time episode, me and James Carter, we were talking about what would a rival franchise to Zelda be? I would say Final Fantasy, just because of kind of how fans engage with the two series. Majora's Mask came out 3 weeks earlier in 2000. Phantasy Star Online on the Sega side was a month later in 2000. Dragon Quest VII was earlier in 2000 and 2001, depending on where we were. And Final Fantasy IX was even delayed so that it wouldn't clash with that game's release in Japan. And then, of course, we had Final Fantasy VIII, as mentioned, just the prior year, and Final Fantasy X just the next year in 2001 on the PS2. So, wow, RPGs.
Quite a
This was
murderer's
the
row.
time.
Yeah. Can you imagine a time where we had 4 mainline Final Fantasy games in 4 years, right?
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
That's absurd.
Amid all this other like big name stuff too.
Yeah. I mean, some of these games resonate more than others. Like I wasn't a PC gamer growing up, so EverQuest, Baldur's Gate, Diablo, they kind of passed me by. But Paper Mario, I was there. Pokemon, I was there on the ground floor. Vagrant Story, to a point, that was a little more niche than I was at that time. I've gone back and tried it. It's fine. Chrono Cross, same thing. I went back and tried it. That one I liked a little more. But yeah,
Chrono Cross was killer as far as critical recognition.
Yeah, for sure. quite a legacy that game leads. But also
Yeah.
too, I find it interesting that one of the notes you put here, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the fact that the Final Fantasy IX characters were used in commercials for Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
I so I in like that era had access to a CD burner, which if you don't know what that is, have your parents explain it to you. And if you do know what that is, it's time to get your hip checked. And I found images of all 4 discs of the Japanese soundtrack, right? And I burnt them onto a separate disc, and the 4th disc had the songs from the commercials. And I'm like,
Really?
what?
Wow.
Why are there Coca-Cola commercial songs on this? What is going on? And then I came to find out later that they were commercials, and I'm pretty sure you can watch them on YouTube now as well, if you want that piece of history.
Yeah, I'm going to do that for sure.
I'm thinking the those commercials did not help as much as they wanted it to, though, because 2.65 million copies in Japan, the second highest selling game of the year, but it did not sell as well as 7 or 8 in Japan or the US. I find that fascinating.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because like what we just said about all those RPGs, all this competition, such a, as you just said, a murderer's row of games in general at that time. You know, the industry was really booming, firing on all cylinders late in the console cycle, really big hitting games. That could have had an effect on the sales of this game. Maybe 8 not being a fan favorite might have led fewer people to buy into 9. And
that is true.
The big thing looming on the horizon, the PlayStation 2, was actually already out in North America by the time this game came out. It had come out a few weeks earlier in October in North America. So we had this game on the PS1 while the PS2 was already vying for everyone's dollars and attention.
Now,
And
that's
Final
true.
Fantasy X soon.
That's true, but I would argue that PS2 was backwards compatible back then, right?
Ah, you're right.
And
you're right.
I find it interesting that it did not sell as well as the 2 previous games, although it does make sense with 8, you know. So yeah, I mean it's unfortunate, but it does. The more I think about it, makes sense.
I feel like all the Final Fantasies though have their lovers and their haters. There's no universal love or universal hatred, I think, for any Final Fantasy. You're always going to find little niches of people who really attach to different ones.
That's true. I think you would be more you'd have more success finding a Final Fantasy that's universally panned as opposed to one that's universally loved. I don't know what that would be. The franchise
13.
as a whole.
I feel like that's the one.
That's probably the one. But yeah, so 9 has had a couple of remakes and re-releases throughout the years. It was part of the 25th anniversary Ultimate Box in 2012. It hit mobile and PC in 2016. The PlayStation 4 official port there in 2017, and then Switch and Xbox One in 2019. So it is now pretty universally available. You name the console and it's there. Not hard to find anymore. Original release had a 93% on game rankings, which is what old folks call Metacritic, and then a 94% on Metacritic. Currently, where we sit, and I would like to maybe ask for a redaction, not a redaction, but a live on podcast fact check.
The highest rated Final Fantasy game of all time. You said that it was not as well received critically as Final Fantasy VII.
No.
I was going to let that go, but I think I get what you're saying. Like, maybe it wasn't as well received by fans, despite it having a higher critical acclaim. Ultimately.
Yeah. I just remember when I played it, friends of mine who were amped for 7 and 8 were very cool on 9. Like, I was one of the only ones that was playing it at the time. So yeah, but yeah, there it is. It's the highest rated Final Fantasy game of all time. And if you're keeping score at home, things Jason got wrong, the score is 1.
No worries. But that critical reception brings us to our critical reception. But first, I just want to see if there are any really fun, interesting stories from your prior relationship with the game, because I'm going to be real quick for mine. I never played Final Fantasy IX. You guys knew that because I said it earlier. So this will have been my first play. So Jason, any stories, any memories for when you first got the game?
I remember hearing Garland's theme in Terra
Oh.
for the first time and being so enamored with that heavy pipe organ song, that I learned how to play it.
Really?
I learned how to play it on my my Radio Shack keyboard that I had and have, I should say. It's around here somewhere.
Amazing.
And I put on the pipe organ sound, and I learned it with one hand, but I could do enough with the second hand to make it sound at least as authentic as possible. And to date, it was the first ever Final Fantasy song I was able to wrap my head around completely, because I've never, when it comes to piano / keyboard, I can always do the right hand stuff. It's the left hand stuff that always gives me trouble in putting it all together. But that one sounded good. And
you learned something new about Jason today. Yeah. I had no idea you played piano at all.
It is amateur at best, but I tinker. It's more of a tinker.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that song. It took over my brain. I'm like, wow, that is the Phantom of the Opera type stuff in my in my Final Fantasy. I dig the hell out of that, and yeah, it was awesome. And then the Coca-Cola one I mentioned earlier, the commercials. I still find that fascinating. What a weird collaboration.
Yeah, I gotta listen to that. That's like so weird. Okay, so that's you. You got the game like right at launch, you said? Like right when it came out?
Not right at launch. If it launched in November, it was probably like Final Fantasy VIII was a following Christmas gift, so I waited like a month.
Okay. I mean that's still right at launch to me.
Sure.
That still counts. You're a kid, right? You're asking mom and dad at that point.
And that I did.
Okay, so here we are. We played the game. We spent 30-something hours on it, I think. About how many hours did you spend on this game for this play?
That sounds right. 20, high
well,
20s,
40.
low 30s. No, I don't think I got to 40.
Depends
I
what
have
you
to
do.
go back and check my my save file again. I think it was a 34, 35, something like that. I took my time in some places, though.
So it's a huge game. We got to figure out some way to structure this conversation. Maybe we'll talk about like the different elements of the game. I mean, I guess we covered kind of the genre. It's an RPG. It's got a party system. You know, you've got 8 characters who are ultimately in your party. Each of them is a different class. You go from place to place, hitting story points, lots of conversation, lots of battles where it changes to a different perspective. You're putting in your combat commands and playing through. And could we say that the primary underlying, foundational component of this and any Final Fantasy game is the story and the characters?
Yes, absolutely. That has been the focus of the franchise. If not before 7, then since 7. They have tried to really focus on telling a peak story while keeping the format of the game as close to the classic turn-based RPG style as possible. And this one is no slouch in that story department either. As you mentioned at the top of the show, the word existential very much applies to this game. And in some very interesting, thought-provoking ways that to a 13, 14-year-old playing this game for the first time, really, I don't want to say I was a sheltered kid, because I wasn't, right? I was in public middle school at this point. I'd heard my fair share of swear words. But like there was like the whole thing with Vivi and what he is, and then Zidane and what he is, just really screwed with me for a little while. And the fact that I had known from Final Fantasy VIII and to a lesser extent Super Mario RPG that games could tell more complex stories than I thought as the medium continued to grow. But this one really hit hits some really emotional peaks and valleys with the way it tells its story, which is funny too, because they kind of repeat something they did in 7 when Cloud has his breakdown here in 9 with Zidane having his. But for whatever reason, I just felt more attached to Zidane's than I did Cloud's. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, Zidane to me, I feel like some people will think he's kind of annoying, but I found him very likable. And I would struggle to put the word likable in a sentence with Cloud. So
that's fair. that is fair. That works.
So there's that. But this story, like, it's so interesting to me because I'm gonna quickly spoil everyone's mood and say that I have a lot of bones to pick with this game, but the story to me was super cool in the end. Whereas in the beginning, I felt like it was an entirely different thing, and only like 2/3 or more of the way through did it change into a really heavy, deep and interesting story that I got engaged with. I don't know if that happened to you, if you were into the nations taking over other nations, a very sort of geopolitical in a fantasy setting sort of story. But for me, that really did not hit. It did not. I didn't latch on to any of that stuff, and I felt it was kind of like paint by numbers almost. And then we got toward the end of the game, we got out to that outer continent, we started revealing some mysteries, and then I started to really be engaged with the story, and I started to be invested and interested and really curious about what was coming next. And then we had like revelation after revelation after revelation in the end of the story, which was super cool. But I kind of wished it was less backloaded for my taste. Do you get where I'm coming from on that?
Yeah. Did you not like the Festival of the Hunt?
I did like the Festival of the Hunt, actually.
Yeah, that part was,
I thought that was
fun.
like a fun gameplay moment. I don't know that it was necessary, but but sure. Fun. Like, actually, I feel that's another thing. I feel like there was a lot of stuff in this game that could have been streamlined and edited out, like excessive conversations about things that were ultimately not important, little interactions. For example, like the whole thing where there's a love letter and it's dropped and someone else picks it up and someone else picks it up. I can see people really liking that for the humor and the silliness of it, and sort of almost like a Shakespearean nature of it, honestly, if we're thinking about it.
Very jester.
That
very
stuff didn't work for
sorta,
me.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
But overall, the story, I think, is super cool by the end.
I think going back to it, I sort of appreciated the geopolitical part of it a little more post Game of Thrones, right? Like that show kind of tuned me into how a medieval fantasy setting could really play the political game. Now, I am not by any means saying that Final Fantasy IX's geopolitical aspects even compare to what the Game of Thrones was able to do, but I do appreciate the attempt. I was entertained by that stuff. Queen Brane is a very despicable villain, and it's just very nice to see her get hers. But I agree with you that once the outer continent hits,
it's like 15 to 20 hours in or something.
That part really ramps stuff up. Like
you hit Conde Petit and then the Black Mage Village, and now you're like, stuff's happening here that we
what
didn't
is
know
all
about.
This? And then
the tree. We could have used more hints earlier, like not even hints, but like just peeks into the mystery that keep you like hungry for more, rather than feeling like the geopolitical thing is all it is.
Yeah, that's fair. But I would also argue that they had that problem throughout the entire game, because if you can explain to me why the final boss is then you understood this game more than I did, because I beat Trance Kuja, and I thought, back in the first playthrough, I knew it was coming in the second one, and I thought that was it. I finally beat this jerk, even in his trance form. I'm going in, everything's gonna be fine. He's not gonna kill the crystal, and then this massive Gothic painting looking whatever decides, no, you're not done yet. You have to fight me too. And then
It's like,
he
and you
wasn't as
are?
hard. Yeah.
Thanks for showing up.
Yeah, thanks. Where have you been the
Yeah.
entire game? Did you just like hear a disturbance and decide to investigate? Are you Galactus? What's going on here?
And that's the second time that kind of happened, because even when Garland, that's right. Like even when he kind of came on the scene, I was like, and what? Oh, okay.
Who are you?
We're like a day into this game in hours.
Yeah. Yeah. And now it's just boy has daddy issues. Is that what this is? It's you know what they did? They reused Solid and Liquid Snake.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. And again, you're playing as the dominant clone.
Yeah.
It is interesting to me the parallels between those three characters here and the snakes in Metal Gear Solid. But I think though what takes you through the geopolitical part, even if you're not that interested in it, is, as we keep talking about, the characters that are present, from Steiner, that lovable buffoon that he is, and his relationship with Beatrix, to the two worst Final Fantasy characters in this game, if not of all time, in Zorn and Thorn. I hate them.
Ugh.
They're the worst.
So annoying.
And I wish they would go away. But then you start to introduce like Freya when you get to Bermesia, and then you go to Clara and you see her world that gets, obliterated. Amarant seemingly comes out of nowhere. He's just a bounty hunter, but then he was my favorite party member. I used him for the rest of the game.
Oh, for gameplay reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, story-wise, he just kind of like shrugs. He's like, yeah, whatever, man. Cool. He's basically just, dumb hired muscle. But man, his ability's great. I feel like the fact that the characters can get you through to the more interesting stuff is a big strength in this game. Because if it was just geopolitical, I agree with you. It would have fallen flat.
Yeah. Personally, though, I only really felt attached to Zidane, Dagger, and Vivi, and a little bit of Steiner because he came along and he was sort of the comic relief. But I could have done without Quina being in the game. I could have done without Amarant being in the game. I kind of liked Aiko, but she was almost like a repeat of Dagger as far as use case. I mean, I loved her crush on Zidane, which was like him getting a taste of his own, medicine, crushing on every girl, which was kind of funny. But yeah, those three at least, and we could say four, right? Because everyone loves Steiner except me. They were really interesting to follow. My only problem was a lot of times we were taken away from our characters. And this will go into gameplay. Like we can transition into gameplay because you talked about fighting with Amarant. I'm going to talk about right now the way that the game does. I think only 2 times really in the entirety of the game do you have your party and have the opportunity to choose who you want to use and go do things. And otherwise, throughout the game, it's taking you from vignette to vignette, separating the party up in different ways, which is a cool idea for sure. But I feel like it left me not playing the game or characters I wanted to play, which may have been exacerbated by the fact that they have defined class roles in this game, unlike some other Final Fantasies. So you have your black mage, you have your white mage summoner, you have your thief, you have your knight, you have your dragoon, you have your fighter. And that's what they are, which is cool. I like that. I like when the game sets up characters so that they're one thing and you don't have to necessarily go in and customize them, and you can't make everyone all things. And I like that too, but I like this too. But the problem is when they do define the characters individually and then don't give you the option to choose which ones you want to use, it kind of defeats the joy of that. Maybe not, the entire purpose of it, but like players get joy out of choosing the types of characters, the classes of characters that they want in their party. So that was like a misstep for me.
You're more of a job system.
Yeah, I mean, I like job systems, sure, because I get to, choose the job of the characters that I want, or just
Right.
having my 8 characters and I can switch them out all the time. Like Final Fantasy X, for example, you have your whole party with you on your epic journey. You only
Hmm.
have 3 in the battles at any time, but you can swap them out not only between battles, but even in the battles. You can swap characters out. So you have all your different characters. But in that one, you don't have classes, so it doesn't really matter. But in this one, since you do have classes, it would be a really cool addition to be able to swap them in and out.
Yes, I agree, but
Yeah, let's bring those butts
let's
in.
yeah, I mean 10 was
Ooh,
after 9,
soft.
and Jesus Christ. 10, that I believe that live swapping feature was a PS2 edition, yes?
Yeah,
Like that
I
was
think that
something
was
the
the first
PS2 could
time.
do and the PS1 couldn't do.
But in prior
Um,
games, like you built your own party, or
right,
you
yeah,
had your chosen party
I
at any given
acknowledge,
time.
yeah, for sure. I wasn't as against what you're saying here. I
Hmm.
liked being able to. I mean, I liked being able to mix and match parties and stuff like that. But I had my 4, and then one was replaced. Amarant replaced Steiner at one point, but it was always Zidane, Vivi, Garnet, and the 4th, because those were the 3, as you said, I was most invested in the story. I liked other stories, like I mentioned Steiner and Beatrix and Beatrice and stuff like that, but those were the core 3 for
Yeah,
me. So they stayed in my party because I cared the most about
when
them.
you could.
Yeah,
Sometimes
right,
the game didn't
right.
give
There
you the
were.
choice.
That's true. That's true. And but like in the case of Vivi, when he gets caught in the cage early in the
Yeah,
game in the evil forest, all that did was make me want to break him out as soon as possible.
yeah.
So I see where you're coming from.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, and the vignettes are interesting, like the different little, switch over to this group and see what they're doing. But this
yeah,
group is doing this other thing. Like these few are going to Alexandria. These few are going to Bermesia. They don't know where they're going. Oh, they find out what's happening over here versus over here. So like they use it to good effect to kind of drive the story and explain how certain characters are in certain places and don't really know what's going on in other parts of the world. And I think that's really cool.
sure, sure. But so it sounds to me like anytime you couldn't use Vivi, you were very upset, which is fine.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's fine.
I wanted Vivi all the time, if we're being honest.
He's the best. He's the
Vivi
best.
is
He's the moral
easily the
compass
best. And I
of the whole
love
game.
that. I love
Yeah.
how important they make black magic. I think that's really
Yeah.
cool. It's like, oh, these black mages are really special. And that's why only he has this black magic. And
Mhm.
he's super powerful. And you see, even in his like little kid state, he saves them when they're going through North Gate or South Gate, whichever gate, and they're being chased by the Black Waltz, and he like explodes the whole thing in this amazing
Yeah.
cutscene. And throughout the game, you see he's like your big heavy hitter with his magic, and he always has something that can do really well against your enemies. But you were talking about the battle system in general, right? Or like the way that you were using your characters in the battles.
Mhm.
What's your overall impression of the battle system and like how to use the characters and how it worked out with the different abilities and stuff?
I like the turn-based system. I always
Hmm.
have. I did like the ability system here more than 8. I will say that 8, the abilities were tied to the Guardian forces, and you had to equip the summons to get the abilities. This one was a little more. Everybody had their jam, and I
Hmm.
appreciated that. I did like that they could like learn some stuff and learn it forever. And then you
Yeah.
could kind of like customize your character in that regard with like the little crystals. What do they call them? Why can't I remember what the hell they're called? And you just set the abilities as you wanted them in their menu there.
Yeah, basically equipping and de-equipping
Right.
abilities based on a
Abilities.
pool of points, right? It's like ability points. I don't know exactly what they're
Yes.
called, but it's like gems.
Right. Yeah, I don't.
And
I,
each character only has so many, and you have way more abilities than your total pool, so you have to make choices based on what's coming up. You're in a place with a lot of flying enemies, you put on bird killer. You're in a place where you're going to get put to sleep by an enemy, you put on insomniac, so you can't fall asleep, that sort of thing, which is cool to like be able to strategize for the world you're in.
it adds a little bit of a customization into the game, which I
Yeah.
think is pretty neat.
Yeah, I like that. I like, having to figure out what would be best for any given moment. I think the ability system's really cool.
How do you feel about trance?
I mean, if it happens, it happens.
Sure.
We didn't have control over it, but I mean, I love going into trance when necessary. Sometimes going into trance happens against a standard weak enemy, and you wish you could have held on to it and saved it for the boss.
Yeah,
So
that's definitely true.
for me, it's not like a selling point.
Yeah, that was my big issue with it. The fact that you could lose it through no fault of your own just by hitting a random encounter.
Like limit breaks and overdrives, those you could save and use them when you wanted to, right?
Yeah, here you could not, and that makes me sad because, like you said, there's a big boss coming up, but then you take a step and get hit with a random encounter, and everybody trances, and you're like, oh man,
Cool.
I was ready, and now I'm not, and that makes me sad. But yeah, it basically is just limit break or overdrive by a different name. And I was curious if you had noticed the fact that you lose it through no fault of your own. That part sucks. Oh my god.
Yeah, it's just like something that happens to you rather than something that you use to your advantage.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask what your favorite, what to you sticks out as the best cutscene in the game. I have one, and I've had one since the first playthrough, and it was great to relive it. But I'm curious what yours is.
Oh man, the cutscenes are good.
Yeah, they are.
I don't know. What's yours?
Mine is when the castle turns into Alexandria or Alexander.
Yeah, I was thinking of that one as part of it.
That one blew my 14-year-old mind or 13-year-old mind, whatever I was.
And that was in a sequence of good cutscenes, like with
that
Muhammad coming down before.
That whole battle, that whole scenario is phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, one of my favorite moments is actually within that series of cutscenes, and it's when Zidane is a true hero and swings in and lands next to Garnet and swings away with her before like everything goes black and we skip forward in time. I love that. I love that heroic
I do too.
moment.
I agree with you. That swinging part, that was nice to relive because I had forgotten it. Right?
Yeah, there's a lot of cool heroic moments like that. Like when I mentioned before, Vivi saving them as they were on the ship from the Black Waltz and that explosion, like the exciting moments. It's a lot of that. Or when they're running out of the evil forest and we have the sacrificial petrification of Blank. He throws them the map.
Who I would argue is named that because he was an early character who died and they couldn't think of a name, so they just called him Blank. It works. But yeah, he's the one who throws the map and then gets stuck in the evil forest forever as a rock boy.
Yeah, so this is all story stuff, right? Story stuff. That's super important to an RPG, right?
Yeah.
But the other big thing in an RPG is you're gonna have a buttload of battles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this one you do, because the encounter rate is insanely high when you actually do get to walk around, which is really not a ton, but when you do, it's a lot. Like you take a few steps and you have a battle. You take a few steps and you have a battle. And for me, that was awful because I did not enjoy the battles. I don't love the ATB system. We say it's a turn-based RPG, but it's not really and truly turn-based. It's kind of turn-based, kind of real-time. It only ever stops if you click into your magic menu item or if you click into your item menu item. And I find the system kind of frustrating and frantic and hard to pay attention to. Like if I'm trying to succeed in this battle system, I have to do things as quickly as possible, because if you just sit there looking at your menu, the enemy will continuously attack because they're on a timer. They have a certain amount of time between actions. So you have to be doing stuff all the time. So I'm staring at the menu, and then things are happening in the scene of the battle behind me, behind the menu, and like I'm seeing what the damage is and what's happening. So I can't really pay attention to how well certain attacks are doing because I'm focused up in the front, in the foreground on my menu, trying to make things happen in the future faster, because it's tuned pretty tightly in that the battles are always, fairly challenging for where you are. Like each battle, even with the grunt enemies, takes a bit
Hmm.
And that's not just because they're really slow battles with the zoom in and the pan and the swing around load time for the battle. They're involved, even the basic fights. So I had a struggle with that the whole game because I just didn't want to do the battles, and that was a problem because battles in an RPG are a huge part of it.
I am with you
Oh.
on this.
And you were able to just say, I can look past it because the story.
No. I remember the first time I played it being very frustrated with how often I was getting into battles. Like, I would be completely fine leaving a town. Everyone had full health and I had a decent amount of items and I could make it to the next part. And then I would take one wrong turn, right? Or I'd get turned around. And before you know it, I was staring at a game over screen.
You're fighting your way to a dead end and fighting your way back to where you started and fighting your way to the correct direction. Yeah.
Yes. The only silver lining I found in being in the world map is the excellent tune Crossing Those Hills.
Yeah.
That little, like that song. I do
like that track.
Get to that spot and not move and just let the song play for a while.
Just calm down.
Real zen moment.
Calm music.
I would have to. I would have to do that. I think they did that on purpose because they knew that they were going to give you a random encounter every 5 steps. So they had to make that music so soothing to calm the rage that was bubbling up from getting smacked around by these grunts. And even like it was just as bad when you could dispatch the grunts easily, right? Because like then just going through there's no challenge. It's like, oh, this guy again. Oh, this guy again. There's my 10 gil and my 100 experience when I need 10,000 to get to the next level. It's the World of Warcraft South Park episode where they're hunting boars over and over again to get to, the level they need to get to. It just was not, as much as I loved being in the world map, traveling from place to place was always a gauntlet. And I would dread it. And
did you do any grinding in this game?
I didn't have to.
No, you didn't have to. Okay.
It was doing it for me.
Yeah. And I think this is actually a good point where it's worth noting that there is a new version, as we mentioned before, that was released on Android, iOS, Windows, PS4, Switch, Xbox One between 2016 and 2019 that adds convenience features, quality of life features like turning off encounters or auto battle or leveling, having a stronger party so you could kind of play for the story. I did not play it that way. So maybe some of these criticisms would be eliminated had I played the Steam version. And it sounds like when you mentioned discs, you were playing the original version again too. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I was. I managed to find my copy and play it that way. I wanted the pure experience again because I remembered basically what you said. When Final Fantasy VIII Remastered came out in 2019, I played through it, loved it. But it had triple speed on every battle, so you could just pick real fast.
There you go.
And while I appreciated that, right, it kind of took away from the era. And for this, I felt like if you were playing it in the era, I should too. So I suffered for you, Eddie. I suffered for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I always prefer to play kind of the original experience, which I don't know if that's dumb, to be such a purist at my own, to spite myself. But at least now I know what it was like to play it back in the day. But the funny thing is, even though I have the game, I still emulated it, and I used save states much to my benefit because it's one of those old RPGs where you could end up going for a long time and running into some bad luck and having to play hours of gameplay again. So I'd use those.
The thought of that just makes me squirm
right?
in my chair.
Ew, it feels gross. But that's what it was like back then. Nowadays, it's always saved for you. And it's always saved in such a way that you can't save yourself into a corner. And I don't think you could save yourself into a corner in this game like you could in some of the older, 16-bit era games. But sometimes the save points were pretty hours of gameplay apart.
You did have open save in the world map, but then again, you could be saving yourself into a corner and not know it.
That's
Right?
true.
Because like I tried it. I would save and then take a couple steps and get the random encounter. I would reload the save and get a couple of steps and get the random. It didn't matter. Like it was happening no
going to
matter
kill
what.
you.
Yeah. It's like, so I had to find either go a different route or go back to town, go into town and go out to the world map or stuff like that, which was annoying, but there were workarounds.
I loved finding the chocobo and being able to use the footprints and ride and not have encounters, but that was only later. Like it wasn't super useful ultimately. It just was something to make me happy.
Sure.
I think
it was made for you.
Yeah, what else? Anything else on gameplay that really stands out?
We talked about the active time battle, talked about trance, talked about abilities, talked about how each
enemy design
was. They fit in with the rest of the art style. I thought that some of them really, like the black waltz, black mages, the real like gangly looking ones, they were scary. They were spooky dudes. But like you're fighting, the monsters were cool, but it was par for the course back then in Final Fantasy.
Yeah, par for the course sounds right to me.
Yeah, it was right where it needed to be. The transformations were neat. That was cool art, particularly I like Kuja's and Zidane. Zidane looked badass. But yeah, none of that really stands out as like peak monster design. It was good. It was good. Don't get me wrong, but there were others that do it better. Is what
I think it was another thing where it got better as the game went on. Like we got deeper into the game, and now all of a sudden I'm like, oh, these enemies are cooler and like more interesting, and I feel like I'm facing something notable and not just cut and paste. So that was good later on, but again, like I would like less of the game to be better later on,
and more of the game to be better the whole time, and that's fair. That is fair.
I love the whole style of the pre-rendered backgrounds, even though they don't really hold up super well now. It's a very nostalgic look for me. Although not super functional. Like I found myself running into walls a lot, like trying to work my way on the background and
sounds like a modern problem
holes at the edges of the screen. What'd you say?
Sounds like a modern problem. Like it might be something that would have been more discernible back then.
Yeah,
if you had played it like when it came out for the first time. But now you're spoiled by everything that's going on in current graphics or current designs. So you're not expecting a wall where there is one.
Yeah. But I'm like sort of nostalgic for this look, even though I wasn't a big participant in the era of this look. So it was cool. I like that.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Okay, sound, audio, music.
Oh.
Let's go.
Oh,
I've heard this called the best Final Fantasy soundtrack.
That's of the era, maybe
of ever.
Of ever. Oh dear.
I don't personally agree with that, but there were bangers in there.
There are some real bangers. Like the title screen is excellent. That old medieval sound with the You're Not Alone. No, You're Not Alone is a different song. That's the song where he's going through his crisis. Talked about crossing those hills, the world map. Talked about Kuja's theme and Trans Kuja's battle music. The final boss music I don't think is as good as Trans Kuja, but it's still pretty good. This is definitely an amazing soundtrack. Trino, the city of Trino, that old ragtime song. Oh man, that's good stuff. Good stuff.
And now see, here I come to be a wet blanket. There were great tracks, but they were like special tracks. A lot of, to me, I didn't love this version of the battle music as much as pretty much every other battle music, when that's something you hear all the time. And I didn't love a lot of just the basic town and exploration songs. There were a couple that were good. There was one that I really didn't like because it was like really short and just kept repeating. But there were a lot of good ones. I loved Dagger's song that she sang.
Yes.
That's like super sweet.
Memories of Life. Great song.
Mm-hmm.
Melodies of Life.
But in the beginning, I wrote down in my notes, I was like, the Uematsu magic hasn't come up yet, like in 7 and 10, but I expect it. And then later on, I was like, can't say I love the battle music. And then later on, I said something like, is this really one of the better sounds? Maybe it's not. I feel like this might be weak for me.
Just like the rest of the game, it takes a while to get going, but when it goes...
Yeah, when it hits high and it hits hard.
Yeah. I do like the victory fanfare in this one. First game since 6 to go back to the classic victory fanfare theme, and it also has that medieval bent to it, very woodwind sound. Big fan of that in comparison to the previous 2 games, which again are very good, but going back to the classic style like this, I thought that was a neat touch. I like I said, I listened to the entire soundtrack multiple times through, my ways. And that's all I'll say about it. But I have a deep love for it. I see where you're coming from, but the tracks that hit high, they hit incredibly high and put this up there. I don't know if I would agree with best ever, but I'd say top 5.
Nice. Coming from modern day, did you miss voice acting? This was the last game without voice acting in the Final Fantasy series.
But I think that's because I didn't expect it.
Yeah, okay.
But if I was coming in fresh like you, I might have thought differently. Although then again, I've just played Super Mario RPG, the remake, and that didn't have any voice either. So I might have been already ready for it. But did you? Like, would you have rather hear them talk?
I think I would. But I think having them talk would have had the knock-on effect of, I mean, obviously it wouldn't be possible, right? It's on PlayStation. It would have been like 37 discs. I think it would have had the added effect of them reducing the dialogue, which some people would say is bad, but I think that would have forced some of that editing that I thought was necessary, because I thought there was some excessive dialogue and conversation that really just didn't need to be in the story. So I felt like a lot of times I was clicking through these conversations and I was like, sure, I don't really care about any of this, so let's just move on. The important parts, like the real story beats, I was there like, oh, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Give me some progress, give me some development, and it was giving it to me. But other parts, no.
Let me ask you a question about the voice acting part.
Mm-hmm.
How do you give Quina a voice?
I don't know. It'd be weird. Can I eat frogs? I don't know.
Okay, that's sure.
Yeah, you get instruction from the writer. Sakaguchi knows exactly what Quina sounds like in his head.
Yeah, I guess so.
Maybe.
It would just be rough. You're still not sure. You're ducking me. Final Fantasy IX to me, it is a special game to me, being the first one. Super Mario RPG was the first ever turn-based RPG. Final Fantasy VIII was my first Final Fantasy, but this one like kind of solidified my love for it. I tend to, when it comes to like music, if there's a new artist out there, if I like their first song, that's fine. If I like their second song, okay, maybe it's something I should get into. If I like their third song, then I'll explore, right? Kind of took that approach with RPGs back in the, when I had the time to be able to do that. Super Mario RPG was my intro, loved it, but it was Mario, was a huge Mario fan. Let's try. I played some Final Fantasy VII at a friend's house. Like I said, played some Chrono Trigger. Let's go with 8. 8 blew me away, but I wanted to be sure. 9 solidified it. I was an RPG guy. That's it. And that made me go back and play. Like I mentioned Final Fantasy V, I played that in the Final Fantasy Origins collection on PS1 after playing 9. I didn't play that live it didn't come out in America until then, I guess. But I would not even have touched it if not for 9, solidifying the fact that I liked RPGs. This game also really enhanced my appreciation for game soundtracks. 8 will always be my favorite Final Fantasy, soundtrack included. But that one had more of a futuristic bend. This one had more of a back in time sort of bend. And it enthralled me, man. It really did. This is my 3rd favorite Final Fantasy of all time. Some of that may have to do with its placement in my timeline, like when I actually played it. But I can't deny it. It's a great one for me.
Nice.
I'm smashing it. I would say it's worth revisiting.
Super smash. Okay. Now for me. I tried to come into this with like a thesis statement for my feelings about this game, but I kept having different ones. The one is like that I think it is a game that needs a director's cut by a different director, with stuff taken out to make it more enjoyable the whole way through. That kind of plays into, I feel like there's backloaded everything. There's backloaded cool story. There's backloaded gameplay. Things we didn't even mention, like some of the different gameplay portions, like going to the different shrines to open up the portal, doing the Ibsen's Tower, going to a whole new world, all like kind of really interesting stuff. But it's like 70% in the story. It's like standard for a while. And then 70% into the game, it gets cool. So there's that backloaded thing. And then, is it a better movie than it is a game? Is playing the game fun? Is the playing portion enjoyable? Or is the story portion the only reason I'm here? I didn't love the battles. That's a huge part. Even the dialogue, which is technically like it's story, but you're playing through it because you're clicking your way through it. It's delivered in an awkward way, even though it could be a good story. So I just don't know that playing it was fun for me, even though I did really commit to giving it as much of a chance as I could over the long haul. I played over 38, 9 hours. So I'm going to have to say, no, it ended up being a brick, a sad brick. It's a sad brick for me. It's a sad brick that I wanted to love. Like I really wanted it to be part of my brick house, but it's just one of those leftover bricks on the side.
Aww.
But I think it's worth watching, like finding a YouTube video where they condense it and give you the story. 'Cause it's a cool story ultimately, even if parts of it are mundane. I didn't love the villain. Even the main villain who was there the whole time, I thought was like kind of dorky, He wasn't like cool to me, even though he was the villain. He always had these like long drawn out monologues, and I'm like, you are lame. And then there were the other villains that came in who didn't matter because they weren't there the whole time. So a lot of the stuff did not hit for me. And I'm sorry, everyone. I'm sorry. Please keep listening to the podcast.
Terrible.
I'm going to be nothing but honest with you, I promise.
You should be ashamed. No, that's fine. Hey, those are all valid points. If they're not for you, it's not for you. But you're wrong and you should be ashamed of yourself.
I'm wrong, and I should be ashamed of myself. So with that, Final Fantasy IX is a question block, and it's up to you whether you decide to revisit it in 2024 and beyond. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and for playing along with us if you did. And thanks, Jason, for joining me on the show today.
Of course.
Where can people go to find you, Jason?
They can find me at Big Man Fanelli on all social medias, that being Twitter, Instagram, whatever you have, or X, whatever it's called now. I still call it Twitter because I don't like change. But yeah, that's where I put most of my stuff. You can find my writings on Game Spot most of the time, whether it's reviews or news articles. You can also find me at mmorpg.com for the occasional review. Just did one for, what the heck was it? Oh, I did a preview of No Rest for the Wicked, which is the next game from the Ori and the Blind Forest / Will o' the Wisps studio. Completely different in a good way, but it's different. Oh, also, if you are listening to this and you're a fan of tabletop, specifically like card games, Pokemon, Magic, Lorcana, stuff like that, I have started a TikTok / YouTube called TCG John.
Philly.
The Philly people will laugh at the John thing, but I do pack openings. I'm going to start doing some deck techs, and I have a lot of fun with it. So if you want to see some packs get opened and what cards are inside, feel free to follow those on those platforms. That's it. That's where you can find me.
All right, so go find Jason at 48 different places on the internet. But first, take a look at Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcasting platform that you're listening to. And if you've listened this far, leave us a generous and helpful 5-star rating and review for totally free, even if you're a Final Fantasy fan, please. Now, if you want to go above and beyond that and support the show monetarily while getting some fun perks, head over to patreon.com/smashingbricks and become a patron for as little as $1 a month. You can also jump in at the awesome Fire Flower tier and choose a specific game to be played on an upcoming Power Up episode like this one was, and I forgot to mention. Thanks, Legit Camel. I'm sorry I didn't love your game. You can also read my personal notes for each game we play. You can get ongoing recognition on the show, or you can even join me on a guest episode at the higher tiers of support. Again, check out the details at patreon.com/smashingbricks. We have a Discord server, which is our cozy place to chat about anything with the community and to leave commentary about upcoming and past games or suggest games to be considered for the show. Check out the Smashing Bricks playlist to see what you think needs to be added or to evangelize games already listed. Links to everything mentioned, plus all the socials and video stuff, can be found in the episode description and at our link tree, which is linktr.ee/smashingbricks. As for next episode, I'll be joined by Eric of the Board Game Dojo podcast, speaking of tabletop, to play and discuss Pokemon Red and Blue for the Nintendo Game Boy. More RPG goodness coming our way. So get your hands on a copy of that, play along, send in your thoughts, and join us next time on Smashing Bricks. That wraps it up for today. I am still your RPG-loving Eddie Inzauto. That is Jason Fanelli.
Yes, it is.
Jason.
Absolutely.
And until next time, may the nostalgia be with you.